Our daughter was homesick today, and so I got to hang with her a little bit
Mm.
and was trying to distract her mind from like just the icky feelings that she was feeling. So we pulled out mandalas, those like coloring sheets. And the mandalas were exactly the same ones. So I just printed two of the exact same ones. We put on some music and we start coloring these mandalas. Same mandalas, same room, same music playing, and yet the final products are completely different. I mean, they don't even look the same because of the coloring and the patterns that she emphasized and the patterns that I emphasized. And so how many times is that the conversation to have in marriage? Going like, we just lived that season together. We just managed that ministry event together. We just managed to survive that mission team that was here together, whatever that might look like. It's the same exact thing, but they're going to look very different depending on where I'm at. And so at the end of it, I was like, man, these were the exact same when we started. Now they look completely different. Tell me a little bit. Why did you choose that color? And she just started talking to me about it. I think that's the kind of conversation that I think would be brilliant in marriage, is just holding on to this "and" word. Like that ministry moment was beautiful and it was brutal.
We want to help you be the very best missionary so that you can give your very best to the people you're serving. What makes this podcast unique is it's done by missionaries for missionaries. How can we take timeless principles and apply them to our lives as missionaries? That's really our heart behind this.
Welcome to the Modern Day Mission Podcast. I'm your host, Amy Young. Yes, that might have caught you by surprise. I'm Amy Young, and Leigh Gutierrez is here, but instead of being the interviewer, she is in the hot seat with her husband, Danny. Stephanie and Danny, welcome.
Hey, Amy, how fun is this to be on the other side?
I'm excited to be here.
I love it. And we're talking about one of my favorite topics, marriage. I don't know if people know this about you, but you two really are very passionate about marriage.
We are. We've been working in marriage ministry. Oh my goodness.
Since the very beginning, like within the first year of our marriage, we got pulled into it in a small group and yeah, it's been
Probably before we should have.
Yeah,
But hey,
absolutely.
Isn't that true for most of us who have been in cross-cultural work, that we got pulled in earlier than maybe we should have, and yet God uses it and God
That's right.
pays it
Yeah.
forward. Yay.
That's right.
Well, let me read a
Absolutely.
little bit about your bio because people might not know this about you. They know Stephanie, the host, but let's hear a little bit about Stephanie, the other side of you. So, Danny and Stephanie have served in marriage ministry for the last 20 years as conference speakers, retreat leaders, and pastors over marriage ministries in local churches. They served as missionaries for 12 years based in Lima, Peru, and were pastors for nearly 2 decades. Danny and Stephanie now serve pastors and missionaries globally through their nonprofit, Footrock. Additionally, Danny is currently studying to become a marriage and family therapist, and Stephanie is a life and leadership coach and oversees missionary care resource for Modern Day. I can't imagine a better team to talk to about marriage than the two of you.
Well, thank you. And I think most importantly, we just like talking about it too. It's something that we're really passionate about.
Yeah.
Which kind of begs the question, why are you passionate about it? A lot of married people like value marriage, but they might not use the word like, I'm passionate about marriages. What makes you guys so passionate?
Well, I would say it's one of our sources of energy. I mean, so much good comes out of our relationship when things are going well, when things are working, and it's hard to separate that from all the stuff that we get to do in ministry. It's like if this is not going well, everything else kind of lags, and when this is going really well, I mean, it impacts our children, it impacts the people that we serve. It's just so much passion comes out of the passion that we invest in here that it's just fun. It's just fun to talk about. It's fun to encourage other couples in. And
We see a lot of couples really struggling in their marriage, and we get it. I mean, I know it looks like we're always having fun 24/7. We have a lot of fun.
We
It's
do.
the truth. We have a lot of fun, but we put a lot of hard work into our marriage. We have really since the beginning. I would say we kicked it off that way, and it never has changed. So we've hit a lot of bumps along the way, so we understand what it feels like to have an unstable relationship sometimes or have stressors coming at you. But our hope is that couples will be able to put in the hard work. And we know it's a lot more than that. Sometimes there's one spouse putting in a lot of hard work and they're hoping the other one will reciprocate. But we want to inspire couples practically and in a fun way with things they can both do to invest in their marriage so that it is giving them energy instead of sucking energy from them.
Yeah. And we also find that a little bit of conversation, just a couple ideas, empathizing with others, just being there with them goes a really long way. We love hearing the stories come back to us of going like, hey, that dinner conversation or that workshop that you guys did or the conference that you guys led really helped us out. So I think that also stokes our passion that something can happen in conversation and podcasts like this, or just moments that we get intentional about talking about things.
All you need is one idea from the Lord. I really think just have to have a revelation from him in one area to really start things on a new track. And that's our hope, that everybody listening today hears one thing they can put into practice to set them on a new course.
I love that, because if you hear too many things, you leave actually overwhelmed and not sure where to start.
Right.
But if you leave with just one thing, then you're like, okay, I can do that one thing. And the reason I wanted to talk with you guys about marriage today is at Global Trellis, we recently did this survey, which has been referenced on other podcasts. So you can look in the show notes and see a link to that conversation. But that survey was asking missionaries, what is something that could jeopardize you being on the field? Or if supporters knew about this, or senders they would not be happy to hear about it, just for many, many reasons. And one of the top 3 things that came out of the survey results was people talking about their marriages, missionaries talking about their marriages. We had 11 different areas. So when I say the top 3, you might be thinking, well, were there only 4? No, there were 11 areas. And so for marriage to be one of the top 3, I think to many people listening to this, it doesn't surprise you.
Right.
But it does sadden us. It does sadden us. And so as you guys heard that report, what were things that resonated that you saw reflected in that survey and made you even more passionate to help people on the field with marriages?
Hey, Amy, before I answer that question, can I just say thank you on behalf of all the missionaries that got to be part of that survey and all the missionaries that will read the results, because I know your team is still kind of working on processing that and getting it out. And it was eye-opening for us. I just want to say thank you. Thank you.
And I would say that the things that you heard are very reflective of the things that we've seen. So in one sense, it felt surprising. In another sense, it felt, I don't know if the word's affirming, but it felt like, yes, that's absolutely what's going on.
Another thing that I think was really eye-opening, Amy, is seeing it kind of next to some of the responses to some of those other 11 areas, and I noticed that your team even picked up on it, that the way that things were verbalized or written, it just sounded different and was a lot shorter. It was almost as if you would have given the option of like, don't tell me about the marriage situation, but hit the record button and tell me. You may have gotten people just kind of going, ah, ooh, or it's like, I don't know how to tell you other than my marriage is just not working. It's unstable. And basically the lack of words or vocabulary or like, I don't even know where to begin. Where some of these other topics, I can kind of like put my finger right on the nerve that hurts or describe the dynamic that's frustrating me or tripping me up. But when it comes to this marriage, it almost feels like this giant jellyfish of like, I don't even know how to hold it. It just doesn't feel right. And I don't even know where to begin. And so those were the things that were standing out. I think if I were to wrap it up in a word, Amy, it would be weariness. Like I read the responses and I just felt the weariness in the responses.
I add to that loneliness. These were people that sounded lonely in their marriage. And like you said, Danny, I think sometimes it was general things like this stress of life. I mean, some people were overworked and they didn't know how to stop. Other people were underworked. So they're like, our supporters think we're doing things. We aren't actually doing something because we don't actually know what's going on here. So there was both sides of that. So sometimes it was general things. Sometimes it was very specific things like, we're having a really hard time making love because the walls are really thin.
Or the AC. We don't have
And
AC.
we have no AC and we're
We have
sweaty
been
all
there.
the time. And we were like,
Yes.
oh my gosh, Yes.
Whoever wrote that, yes.
That is the truth.
Yeah.
That is the truth. When you're like, I am so hot, do not touch me.
Yes, get away.
Oh, literally.
Where the AC unit that becomes a tool for marriage enrichment. Like, this is not a luxury. This is like, we're doing this to save our marriage.
Like that's not even a joke. I remember after our first, I don't know, year or two, and we've been through like 2 summers, and we were so hot, and we were from Minnesota, so like, you know, this northern or cold, thick blood, I guess. So we got there, and like our girls would be sleeping on the cement
On the
floor,
concrete floor.
the concrete floor. So they would sleep out on it, so it'd be cooler. You'd sleep like spread eagle, up, but the bed's too small. But you're trying to not even like have your fingers touch each other.
Yeah.
So
Don't look at me because you're breathing on me, that
Right.
sort of thing. Yeah.
and you love each other, but like it's awful. And we saved and scrimped and put our money together. And at first we got like an air conditioning unit where you put ice cubes in it. But it was hard to get the ice cubes. And so it lasted us for a while. And then we got our regular air conditioning unit.
And boy,
And oh my gosh.
oh boy. It was like a honeymoon all over again.
Yeah. And yes.
I believe it. And I love that it's so practical. Like, what are the
Yeah.
things? It isn't the spiritual things where the practical is spiritual. I think that's where we kind of separate things and we think, oh,
Yeah.
AC doesn't feel very spiritual. If I'm asking for more Bibles or, you know, this outreach to poor kids, which, yes, we want Bibles, we want outreach to poor
Yeah.
kids. But God also loves the practical side. And I think we're the ones that kind of separate and say, well, this isn't that spiritual. But people listening to this, is there something practical that you could invest in that would help your relationship? Maybe that is babysitters. Maybe it is AC. Maybe you live in a really cold place and so you need heaters or something. Like, what is something practical that helps you to be able to connect?
Yes. And it's not using the lack of them as an excuse. Like, well, I'm sorry, we're not making love because we don't have a fan or air conditioning. And so I'm sorry, there's showers. Like, there's things that you can do. You can get creative, like without getting explicit on here.
Right.
We also want to be real. There are creative things that you can do. So don't let the lack of those stop you, but also don't let the lack of money or guilt keep you from doing something practical that really could make a difference. Because like you said, Amy, we are holistic beings. And sometimes we try and treat issues from only one realm. Spiritual, we got spiritual, we got mental, emotional, and we got physical. And we forget that there are things that we can do, like getting enough sleep, a whole bunch of different things, eating correctly, that can really make a big difference, I think, in our marriage relationship. So agree with you on that.
Yeah.
I thought of one other thing, Amy, if I can add it in. There was this one comment that one of the couples made one of the people made in that survey. And they were talking about how they feel like their marriage is a part of their job. Like, oh, I feel like we have to have a good marriage and we can't be bad because it's a part of our job. And I remember talking to Danny about that. And I went, well, gall, it kind of is. It kind of is. And so that feels heavy, but it is. If you're in ministry, whether you are in your home country or whether you are a missionary, your relationship is a critical part of what you do, because if this is not good,
it'll make or break it.
Yep. It's going to make it. This is not going to be good. You're not going to be able to effectively minister. You will for a while. You'll be able to hold together for a while until everything falls apart. And so taking this really seriously is a big deal. So that was just another thing that has stood out to me.
Well, another comment that stood out, maybe related to that one, Stephanie, was where the participant said, I feel like I have to choose between being a good teammate or being a good spouse. And that sometimes what is a good teammate isn't helping the marriage. And sometimes what's helping the marriage isn't helping being the teammate, isn't helping the work. So what kind of experience did you guys have with balancing that tension of maybe being coworkers and also marriage partners?
Yeah, I think it's constant recalibration, because I think sometimes things are aligned and they're working, and then the season of ministry or something comes up where it kind of shifts or it kind of deviates a little bit. In that constant recalibrating, because what I hear in the response is there are priorities, but sometimes the priorities get out of order. And it's not that if they're not important, it's just that which is the most important and where's the starting point. And so for us, it was even before getting to the mission field, because we knew how to be married in the States for, what was that, about 10 years that we were,
Before we
yeah,
moved
before we
down.
moved down. So we'd been married 10 years, 10 solid years before we moved to the mission field. We didn't know what that was going to look like, but what we did know is we want to stay married. So
Absolutely.
this is going to be the number one priority. And so I remember the conversation giving you kind of the eject button.
Yes.
And we had this really, it was a serious conversation. We weren't being symbolic. It was like, Stephanie, here's the deal. I don't know what I don't know until we get there. And I don't know how I'm going to respond to the pressures and the opportunities, the harvest times and the desert seasons. And so I need you as my friend to always let me know where you're at. And so I'm entrusting you with the only eject button we have. So what that means is if at any point things get too difficult wherever we're at, you push that button and it's no questions asked. It's like a solid stop. We hug everyone. We say, man, it's been a great ride. And we go back to where we can make this happen. And it happened with joy. And I'll go work. I remember I would always tell you, I'll go work for Target, because we're from Minnesota and
Yep,
Target's from around
Target.
here. I'll go work for Target, and Target will become my mission field, because I don't want to get to heaven going like, oh, look at all this ministry stuff. And I'm not there with the person that you're my first ministry, and hopefully I'm yours, and our family is. And so, yeah, I would say there's always this recalibration, because we've gone through those seasons as well, where things seemed on the outside to be going really well. And we would say to each other, we make a good team. We make a good team. And we'd keep doing this. And then we'd be like, wait a minute, that's good. But can we make good lovers too? Can we make good
Yeah.
friends? Can we can that be also very important?
When
So
we started saying that too often, when we started hearing the team language too much, we were
it was
all
our
of a sudden like,
cue.
ooh. Because I think that you want to have the we make a good team, you want to have the I like you, and you want to have the I love you. And all of those things have to be present. Not every couple needs this same degree of teamwork that maybe a missionary couple or a couple in ministry needs. We all need good teamwork in marriage, but there's a whole nother dynamic when you are working together. So you need the we make a good team, but you need the I like you. I like you. You are my friend. I want to have fun with you. I
Yeah.
enjoy being with you. That's essential. And then you need the I love you.
I'm
Like,
crazy about
I am
you.
attracted to you.
You are hot.
Yeah, like there's something
Let's turn the
deep.
AC on.
Yeah. And so I think for couples, it's going, all right, in our marriage right now, what is maybe one of those that's missing? And is my husband not, or my wife not respecting me and not pulling me in as a teammate? Do I feel left in the dust? Are you missing the team piece? Are you missing the fun piece? Or are you missing the love, the romance, that piece? They're all essential.
Yeah. So getting back to the way that they were posing that situation or question is like, yeah, if there's competing values there, or there's a competition, then something's got to win. And I think for us, it was always doing our best to communicate. If there is a competition, you already won. Like
And
you
that
don't have to compete for that. You won. And if you needed to get us off the field or off the course or out of, off the playing field, you won. I'll give you the trophy.
And I kind of think the person who has the highest tendency towards workaholism has to give the button to the other person. That's just the reality. And it can go either way in a couple. But I felt so safe and loved when Danny said that to me, because I knew he meant it. And because I felt safe and loved, I did not use that to threaten him. I didn't pull it out.
Not once.
Never. Going, oh, well, I don't like how
if
you're
you don't,
behaving.
then I'll push the button.
Yeah, I didn't
No.
use it as a threat. There were 2 times I almost had to pull it out. I remember. One was a moment of extreme burnout. Danny was working 3 full-time jobs in one. And I don't say that to exaggerate. That was literally what he was doing. He had 3 titles under his job. I have no idea how he was even alive. And on top of that, this was not part of his job. He traveled 16 times internationally that year to do church consulting. And it was out of control.
My eyes starting to twitch as you're saying it again.
I believe it.
Don't
But I
know.
bet
He had
people
high
listening to
capacity,
this, others are resonating, because unfortunately, that's not a totally unusual story for cross-cultural
not.
workers. It's not. It should be, but
No.
it's not.
No.
And you don't realize it until you're in the thick of it. And you're like, how on earth did we
Mm.
get here? And
Yeah.
this is good because it's kingdom, it's growing, there's fruitfulness. And still, where is my spouse and how is she doing?
But in that moment, I did a lesser version of the button and I said, I'm calling, I need to let you know, because I was falling apart because I had stuff that I was doing as well. And I said, I need to let you know I'm going to be calling our pastor and having a conversation with him because this can't go on this way. And I'm going to let him know that you guys need to talk. And I said it with love, like not as a threat, because I saw him starting to fall apart too. So this is what we need.
Yeah.
And you said, okay.
Well, because it felt like in what we were living, there was a cry for help that I didn't even realize
Mm.
I was crying. And here my best friend and the person that knows me best is going, I've heard it.
Mhm.
And I remember the way that you'd phrase those two moments. I'll never forget. It was never, Danny, you need to go get help
Mm.
or you need to, have this conversation. It was always like, we need to get you help or
Mhm.
we need to get you to have that conversation.
Yeah.
So you're always present with me, but helping me see like, hey, we are out of whack. This is not sustainable for a lot of different reasons, but it's not sustainable for our marriage.
No, and so I appreciate that you responded in those moments. But yeah, I mean, crises happen
Yeah.
on the field.
Yeah.
You guys have touched on an interesting situation. I don't know if this happened to you, but I know of other couples where whatever location they were in was a really good fit for one of the spouses and a not good fit for the other spouse. And so the person for whom it wasn't a good fit felt guilty that maybe they were holding their husband or their wife back. And it is a real wrestle. When do you leave the field? When is it okay that it's not the best fit for one person when it is such a great fit for another person? I don't know. Did you have that kind of situation? And how have you helped other couples navigate that?
Yeah.
It's a great
That's a
question.
great question. I'd say for us, it wasn't like it was a bad fit. It was just like 3 sizes too big for you when we got there and you needed to grow into it.
It's a great way of saying it.
Whereas excuse me, I'm a missionary kid. So as an MK, I'd already had the cross-cultural, spoke Spanish. I'm a third culture kid, and it was in the same country. And so in some respects, it was for me like coming home, and I kind of knew a little bit of the common sense there and how to maneuver and get around. Um, and so it felt like a perfect fit for me almost immediately. But then for you, it was
I had to grow into it.
you had to like the language, you knew some Spanish, but not enough to really have a heart conversation. And so there's a tension there. There's a tension of like, we're here, let's run. Peruvian people are the best. What's your problem? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you being like, hey, I didn't grow up here. Like all of this is brand new to me. And the Spanish I learned is not quite the Spanish that's spoken here. And so I I would say it was about like what, 4 or 5 years before you really hit your sweet spot.
Probably.
Um,
So maybe that's one way of looking at it. For some couples,
Mhm.
it might be a growing into, and the person who feels like it's a good fit or who maybe, clicks into the culture, extending a lot of grace
yes.
to the other one and letting them feel their feels and letting them feel the frustrations and doing their best to help. So I think for some couples, that might be the situation. For some, kind of like you mentioned, it might be a deal breaker or it might be something that's a really, really, really big deal. And I think those kind of decisions have to be made as a couple. And sometimes it's really helpful to bring in an outside voice.
Yeah.
Um, I would encourage a couple like that to process it through with someone who doesn't have a dog in the fight. Find a neutral person who can ask the right questions, who can help you process that through. And I mean, when we lived in Peru, I knew nothing about debriefers and missionary counselors and all the resources there are available. It's out of control how much stuff is available. Like, it makes me so happy. There are things that you can do. There's a counselor. His name is Russell Seaman. He provides free counseling for missionaries. And so we'll put a link to him in there. There's also a amazing counseling place called Vallejo They do psychiatry as well and all kinds of specialized counseling. So that's a great place. There's Alongside in Michigan where they can do debriefs. There's CIT. There's Team and Train. And there's so much out there that I just think if people can avail themselves of some resources like that and process it through and think it through. So that would having the outside person. That's also having conversations.
Well, and then normalizing it, right? I think,
Yeah.
Amy, I mean, you've lived overseas too. I mean, there's always going to be days. It doesn't matter how long you've been in country where you're like, today I absolutely don't fit, nor do I want to fit. I am a square peg and this place is a round hole. And I just like, there's going to be those moments. And I think giving it time and not being kind of knee jerk with it and going like, I just don't fit, and making that decision after a couple weeks or a couple months or on certain days where, you're just down. I think it's giving it time. I
Yes.
think it was patience. That's why I brought up the 4 to 5 years, because it took a while
It wasn't
to
4
be able to
weeks.
say,
It
no,
wasn't
no,
4
no,
weeks.
there's
Yeah.
no.
And not minimizing your spouse's experience if that's what they're going through, because sometimes you get a positive person. I mean, I'm positive. You naturally wired that way. And so sometimes you'll go to the positive person and they'll tell them all their difficult feelings. And the positive person's like, it's okay because God is with us. He will give you strength. I know he will. And this cheerleader response comes out. That's not appropriate for the moment.
Right.
And so as a spouse, if you are the one who is adapting better, how can I hold space? How can I used to tell my family, I have a cup inside of me and my cup can only hold so many negative emotions. And then I just get really stressed out. So I had to ask the Lord to help expand my cup so I could hold more feelings. And honestly, like if that's difficult for you to hear those hard things, ask the Lord to help expand that capacity. On the flip side, if you are the person who needs to vent, sometimes maybe find somebody else to vent to other than just your spouse. There's a lot of ministries and communities out there where you can connect with other missionaries and share some of those difficult feelings. And you've got a community there at Global Trellis. I know there are groups, I think, with Thrive Ministry where you can go and talk about those feelings so that they're not all going to one person into your marriage. Because if that's all your marriage is processing life and difficulty,
Oof.
that is an energy
Super heavy.
drain.
That's not fun. Yeah, then we're
No.
too much on the team, not enough on the I like you, and certainly not on the I
Yeah.
love you. Let's turn the AC up. So,
Yeah. And if
Right.
it honestly, if it gets to be too hard, let's say that they've been there, a couple of years and things are not getting better. And that person's like, get me out of here. They're trying to push that eject button. And the other one's like, I won't leave. This is God's call on my life. Well, I'm sorry. We've all read some of those missionary stories about the spouse that dragged the other one. Back then, it was always the guy dragging the gal.
Yeah.
And how they blew up their marriages for the sake of the gospel.
Yep.
And God still used them in his grace because God is graceful. But he is not calling us to blow up our
And I don't believe
marriages.
that's his will.
And so
Mm.
even if you end up going back to save your marriage and that person just feels distraught, like my calling was there. I know couples like this. I've talked to one recently. My calling is there and I know I need to be here. Well, trust. Like you said, God will give you a
Priorities
mission
out of
field
order.
Mhm.
Yes,
somewhere
but my
else.
calling is first and foremost to you.
It has to be.
You are the number one calling I have. And if we've got to
Same.
relocate to get that back recalibrated right and get that back in the right priority,
Yeah.
then so be
And
it.
we don't say that lightly. We
Yeah.
know how heart-wrenching that is for the person who might have to leave. And that's where maybe counseling can be a good intermediate step before it gets to that point.
Yeah.
And for the person who feels like I'm the one that is taking you away from your dream. Like it's hard for
so.
both. But I love what you said, Stephanie and Danny. Both of you touched on this. And we touched on this earlier that the marriage is a thing, but there's also two individuals in the marriage. And it does also come back to identity. Who are we in Christ? Has Christ
Yeah.
called you to this marriage first and foremost, or to this location first and foremost? And maybe you do truly love a location, which is wonderful. We want wherever you're living to be a good fit. We want you to love it, to love the culture, love the language, love the food, love the heat, love the cold, whatever it is. But do you love that more than you love
Right.
your spouse? And even sometimes, I know this, we're focusing on marriage, but also kids. And sometimes maybe a kid is not thriving in a location. And that's part of marriage too, and part of family. Slightly outside of our purview, but just there's a lot of players, and it is helpful to go back to Christ and to be like, okay, help my identity, Lord, to be in you and to have my priorities
Yeah.
reflect
Yeah.
your priorities.
That's right.
Absolutely.
What is something, though, a couple could do to begin to strengthen their relationship?
And this is one of our favorite things to talk about because we love the word curiosity.
Yes. And it's not just, it's intentional curiosity.
Yes.
I think one of the, to avoid Amy in the space, like getting into prescriptions and like giving people
Yeah.
like, hey, go buy them roses or buy bath bombs or, like all these kind of like cliche things that you hear
Right.
over and over and over in the marriage space, that for missionaries' ears, is just like, but I now feel completely unseen. You have no idea where we live. It's finding descriptions, like what gets us back interested, what gets us back to that place of excitement, like the curiosity that's not judgment, but that's like I'm interested to hear and to understand how you're experiencing this season that we're living on the mission field.
Yeah, because when we move to the field, we are a certain person. We all grow and change in life, no matter where we are. But holy smokes, do you change on the mission field? And so if we get there and we go into straight up team mode and work, in the meantime, we're changing, but we're not doing work here. Suddenly we look and go, oh, hi. Hi, who are you? What happened here? And that lack of curiosity and assuming, oh, I know him. Assuming I know him
You knew Minnesota, Danny, real well.
kills curiosity.
Yeah.
And curiosity brings in fun, it brings in interest. It helps us rediscover who they are because we change in good ways and sometimes in not good ways. So it's critical not only so we have fun together, but it's critical that we see where our spouse is growing. So an analogy we love to use is a trellis. So my dad's a master gardener. And if you look at a trellis, you'll see sometimes there's plants planted at the bottom and these vines kind of just grow up and they just grow and they grow all over the place unless the gardener takes them and threads them through in a specific direction. So if you think of marriage like two plants at the bottom of a trellis, the task of marriage is to continue to thread in a similar direction. We are individuals and we are together. But if we don't attend to our marriage and don't put work into it, all of a sudden we can find ourselves growing in these crazy different directions. And suddenly we're like, I don't know who my spouse is. You hear people say that. I don't know who you are anymore. Well, yeah, that happens if there isn't that intentional curiosity between the two of you on a consistent basis.
And sometimes it's not just even that they're growing. One of them's like withering and the other one's thriving. And one's like, I'm dying here and you're living your best life here on the mission field. And so I guess, Amy, if we were to flip the script and to look at it not intentionally, which I think is what happens a lot of times, is you have couples that go into autopilot because they crave familiarity. I mean, when you get to a new place and like it smells different, it sounds different. I mean, everything tastes different. I don't have the same reference points. I don't know how to do marriage with you here. Like, what does date night look like here? I have no idea. So because we crave familiarity, we convince ourselves that like, okay, if there's one thing I know, it's Stephanie, and now I'm going to use all my energy to figure out the rest of life and banking and going to the grocery store. And why do they ask me 2 questions when they take my card? And like all these things that drain you. And so then you go on autopilot in your marriage instead of being intentional. Like I remember that when we first moved, it was within the first 3 months. And we were in that guest bedroom and we were on that bed that had like the eggshell mattress that was about this big. It was so uncomfortable. It was horrible. And so I took it upon me and like, I'm not sleeping one more night on that bed. I need something that can hold us. Amy, it took me all day long to get a mattress. So I, as a man, am feeling like a failure. Like, why is it taking me an entire day to get a mattress? Why am I signing so many papers to buy a mattress? And here's what happened. I buy the mattress and it was the wrong size because I bought it at a grocery store and I couldn't see it. And so I even asked the guy if I could throw it on the ground. And so I'm trying to measure this mattress
and
between.
You're like, is it a queen?
And I'm like, is this a queen? He's like, yes, it's a queen. Is it a queen? Yes, it's a queen. And I'm like, well, between like the egg aisle and the cereal aisle, I guess so. And I had to like strap it on top of a taxi and just get it home. And I felt like, man, it was the end of the day. I'm like, we did it. We've got a new mattress. Tonight's going to be glorious. And I lay it down on the frame and it was the wrong size. Our sheets don't fit it. And
Danny's a wild sleeper, so we need a little
we-
extra space.
I about lost it. I did lose it that night. It was one of those nights where I'm like, I cannot believe how much energy goes into something as simple as that. And so that's just one story, but when so much of life at the beginning is like that, I just need you to be you and stable and not change. I need you to be familiar because I don't have the energy or the bandwidth for you also to be changing, to have to rediscover and know that, like, can you just be you? And I think that's sometimes where we miss it, where that becomes the default, is like we're on autopilot. And intentional, I believe, is what new conversations come up, being curious about what you're going through, like all those things I think really do help. What, to your question, help us grow, help us continue on that trellis to grow
I
together.
think something that can help with that is learning to ask good questions and then also growing in your capacity to listen. We oftentimes don't feel like we have space or time to listen, like you said, Danny, because there's just so many other things. And we're listening to people at church or in our ministry or teammates. And I don't have time for that. Can you just be easy? Can you just be easy, please?
Don't be needy because everyone else is needy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not a great approach. So learning to ask questions, open-ended questions, not like, let's move beyond how was your day, please. Like, please move beyond how was your day. And it can be something as simple as like what our family has always done is, what are your highs and lows and lupines? We say lupine because there's this book called Miss Rumphius who plants flowers. And her great question in life is, how can I make the world a more beautiful place? So lupine to us means, how did you make the world a more beautiful place? So what's your high, what's your low? How'd you make the world a more beautiful place? And that's just a good starting place. But you can do that as a family. You can do that as the two of you, but then move beyond that. So ask questions that don't have a yes or no answer, and then sit with them and notice how your spouse is responding. And when they're saying something, if they kind of go, and they do a little pause, notice that. Hey, I noticed when you said that, like you made a little face. What were you thinking when you asked that? And avoiding the why. Like, use all the what, when, where, how. Try to not say why, because why feels like such a judgmental question sometimes. So that's just a few little practical things you can do. But enrich that space to have conversation. And if you're somebody who like, I can't sit and do that for an hour, I'm going to lose my mind. Okay, start with 15 minutes. Or if you can't sit and you have ADHD and you need to move your body, go for a little walk. I mean, again, if we use excuses to keep us from doing these things, then we won't do them and our marriages will fail. So that's why we don't like to give a lot of prescriptive things, because people are quick to say, well, I can't do that. Well, I can't do that. Okay. But
What can you do?
What works
Exactly,
for
what can
you,
you do?
your relationship,
You know-
your location. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had this thought. It's an analogy, and it just happened today. Our daughter was homesick today, and so I got to hang with her a little bit and was trying to distract her mind from like just the icky feelings that she was feeling. So we pulled out mandalas, those like coloring sheets, and the mandalas were exactly the same ones. So I just printed two of the exact same ones. We put on some music and we start coloring these mandalas. And here's same mandalas, same room, same music playing, and yet the final products are completely different. I mean, they don't even look the same because of the coloring and the patterns that she emphasized and the patterns that I emphasized. And so now that I'm in this conversation, I'm thinking about how many times is that the conversation to have in marriage? Going like, we just lived that season together. We just managed that ministry event together. We just managed to survive that mission team that was here together, whatever that might look like. It's the same exact thing, but they're going to look very different depending on where I'm at. And so at the end of it, I was like, man, these were the exact same when we started. Now they look completely different. Madeline, tell me a little bit. Why did you choose that color? And she just started talking to me about it. I think that's the kind of conversation that I think would be brilliant in marriage, is just holding on to this "and" word. Like that ministry moment was beautiful and it was brutal.
And tying back to the curiosity, because so often I assume everyone experienced something the way I did, so I don't need to ask.
Exactly. Exactly.
and going, oh, that's right. We had the same experience, but we also didn't. What were your highlights? What was the most frustrating?
Yes.
What was a meaningful interaction? Yes. And getting curious and reminding
Yeah.
myself, not everyone sees the world the way I do.
No.
Oh, there's so many times we'd come home from something and be like, oh my gosh, that was the best ever. And the other one would be like,
I hated every
not
minute
for
of
me. I
it.
talked to all of the really difficult people tonight.
Yeah, it was. So if we're going to
Mhm.
ask the questions and we're going to realize everyone gets to have their own experience,
Mhm.
is letting them have it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just going like, and yeah, it was difficult. And look what the Lord did. And what can we change the next time we do that? What did we learn from it?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
for those who tend towards positivity or those who tend toward negativity and it's hard for them, there's some couples like that. They're just wired
Yeah.
very differently in their personalities. I think for the people who are positive, like we mentioned, it's learning to hold space. It's learning to just sit with some of those heavy feelings and go, it's okay. They can have their experience. They can have it.
Mhm.
And I don't need to internalize what they're feeling or take that on. And then for the person that is maybe a little bit more negative or they struggle more, it's incorporating moments of gratitude and being like, I don't have to vent every negative thing to my spouse. I can vent it to the Lord. I can vent it to a friend. And also I can incorporate gratitude into my life as well, because yeah, God calls us to celebrate what it is that we're doing too. There is good things to celebrate. So with your personalities, if you're finding yourself clashing really hard, I believe God can help you still find common space between the two of you.
Yeah.
I'm picturing some people listening to this going, that all sounds great for you, Danny and Stephanie. You built into your marriage before it got to a crisis point. And, if we could rewind the clock, we would rewind the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. But we're now in crisis. So what advice and not even advice, what do you say to someone who is in crisis in their marriage?
You say get help immediately.
Yeah.
And that is, I know that seems so easy and I know what it costs you. I don't say that lightly. I know that could cost you being on the field. I know it could cost you your reputation. It could cost you what looks like everything. But it can't
If it
be.
saves this, though,
If it
it's so
saves
worth
this,
it.
and there are ways that you can do it again before you have to escalate it to the point of maybe telling your sending church. There are counselors, like we mentioned earlier. There are retreats. There are places that you can go or Zoom calls that you can make where you can get help. So start there. But if it does not get better and it keeps getting worse, reach out and get the help that you need, because if you blow it all apart, God always redeems it. If things fall apart, God will still be there for you, but you don't want to lose this gift that He's given you. So that'd be what I'd say.
When I'd say also, we've been through some really difficult seasons as
Oh
well.
my
I mean,
gosh.
we could share here what it was like at the beginning of our marriage, being the parents of a child with special needs and significant special needs, and what raising a child with special needs on the mission field looks like, and the strain it puts on a marriage. I think it's one of the highest demographics for divorce are parents of children with special needs, and so
Or the
we've
cross-cultural dynamic. I know a
Yep.
lot of listeners, they're maybe in a marriage with somebody who's of a different culture, or like Danny, even though he was born in the States, he grew up living in Peru and his parents are Peruvian. So he brought another culture in and I brought another culture in. So the clashes that happen with that are huge as well.
and some of those came after we'd been married, and so um, I would say, to answer the question, Amy, is like today, like take advantage of today, because this is what we have in front of us. And what was very helpful for us were some pre-decisions. Like we pre-decided that if this, then that. There are certain things that we will fight tooth and nail to keep our priorities in place. Well, those decisions can be made today, whether you're in crisis or not, is sitting down and having the difficult conversation or the curious conversation of like, where are you at? Where are we at? And what decisions are we going to make today that align with our values and is going to keep us moving in the right direction together? And can we make some pre-decisions today based upon that? I think it's a good start.
Yeah, but find out where you're at. I mean, sometimes we don't want to go to the doctor because we don't want to hear what they have to say. Ask the hard question. If we were to rate our marriage on a scale of 1 to 10, what number would you give it? And what number would I give it? Ask. And then, something we talk a lot about in the marriage curriculum that we just produced for missionary marriages is we call it all-terrain marriage, because it's looking at the terrain of life that you find yourselves on. That's the whole premise in it. And so, and for people who are interested in it, we provide it completely free through Modern Day. So you can just go to mdmpodcast.org and you can sign up for our weekly newsletter. Well, you get a notification when a new one comes out each week, or you can go to YouTube and just look up Modern Day Missions and you'll find the series there. But it's called All-Terrain Marriage because we want to build a marriage that can not just survive, but thrive on any terrain we
Right.
find ourselves in, whether it's a desert season or a mountain season or a beach season or a crazy jungle season. But in all of that, where we begin in the series is finding out where you're at, because you're not always on the same terrain. Like we talked about earlier, you might be in your mountaintop high and I might be in my valley down low. And unless we pause and figure out where I am, where you are, and where we are,
Yeah.
I think that really is the information that we need to take that next step.
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned that resource, because I was going to get to it. I'm very excited, because whether you're in crisis or not, we don't want you to get to crisis. And one way, so if
Right.
you're in crisis, reach out. If you're not in crisis, invest in your marriage now. And as Stephanie and Danny have said, they've created this whole marriage curriculum that's free. It comes with handouts. You could do it yourself in your marriage. If you're looking for something, how many weeks is the series?
It's
8
8.
weeks.
8 weeks. So if you're looking for something for an 8-week period, like what are we going to do on date night? What are we going to do on our afternoon? Finding time, actually putting it on your schedule. I would encourage everyone who's married listening to this, find time to block off an hour a week to go through this material. There are handouts, there are short videos each week, and a way to invest in your marriage, and kind of it's a great way to touch base on where are we now, and then how can we invest in our marriage. It's also something you could do if you're at a local church with other couples in your church. It's a way to bring some marriage ministry to a local church. If you've been looking for free resources, it's something you can do on your team with teammates or other people in your organization to build into the marriages in your organization. It's a fantastic resource. And so, Stephanie, again, where is it located? So people now they're like, wait, get out your pen, write it down. Where can they get this?
So they can find it just by going to YouTube and searching in their Modern Day Missions. And then within the playlists that we have there's a playlist called All-Terrain Marriage, or they can search All-Terrain Marriage. They can also sign up for the weekly newsletter that we send out each week, and that will have a link to the latest video, and that's mdmpodcast.org. But yeah, it's fun. We based it off of a lot of marriage conferences that we have done for couples and for missionaries. And so we've talked to couples who began doing the videos, some individually, some in their small group. And
It's
we're
fun to
excited
hear,
with
because
their
our
back.
desire and our hope with it is not to really teach people anything. It's to generate
Well,
conversation.
there's teaching
There
in
is,
there,
but I
Danny.
think that the heart behind it is not like, hey, let me give you a list of prescriptions. It's almost to
No.
stir the pot a little bit.
Yes.
It's like it's to realize, hey, there is a lot of data that may be going over my head. There's a lot of
Yeah.
stuff that I might not be aware of that's happening inside of my spouse or happening inside of me. And what if we got curious about it? And so our hope is with all of these that it generates a bunch of conversations that you could actually take on date night.
Yes.
So if you're like at a date night, you're like, what are you going to talk about? We're going to talk about the ministry. We're going to talk about the kids. We're going to talk about what happened this week. Instead of like, hey, where are you at? And so, yeah,
It is. It's really interactive. And so as you go through it, I mean, we'll even have places where you can pause the video and pull out a sheet of paper and jot something down or look at some images on the screen. So we make it fun. It could be, trying to be totally honest, I do have ADHD. It's a real thing. And I have a hard time sitting. We were not going to make it hour-long sessions or even 30-minute sessions. So they're like 15 minutes to like, I think the
20.
longest one is like 23. So they're short. They have pauses in them, and there are things for you to do. So that, like Danny says, you don't just sit and just like take in information. No, and the things that we have you do, the exercises are not difficult. We make them super easy and super accessible, and they will lend towards great
Yeah.
conversations that will hopefully spark that curiosity like we've talked about and let you begin to know your spouse again.
I love that. So again, it's not a barrier being on the field. This is bringing a marriage retreat, marriage resources, just marriage conversations. What we've talked on earlier, being intentional. And sometimes we're like, okay, I really want to be intentional. And then we just look at each other because
Like, how?
right, how? And so this is actually, it's kind of like getting the recipe. And now you guys, you listeners out on the field, you go cook the meal. You get to add a little bit more salt or a little bit more this.
Yes.
It's the recipe to get you some guidance to have the conversations that are going to deepen your connection in your marriage. And
That's a great
just,
analogy.
yeah, that is so great.
Great
Well,
analogy.
I enjoyed watching the videos myself, and I was like, oh, I should get out a piece of paper and take some notes. As a single person, it's still good to touch base on what is the terrain that I'm on? Where am I? All of that. I
Totally.
really think they could be great. So I'm hoping member care people are flagging this, marking this as resources to send out to people in your organization for marriage. You could even facilitate. I have so many ideas how you could use this. But Danny
You're
and
the idea queen.
I'm the idea queen.
You are, Amy.
I am. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's such a fun resource. And you guys even, I loved in the very first video, Danny, you made a sex joke. And I was like, yes, but I'm like, okay, this is real life. I loved it.
Let's talk about it.
Absolutely. I was like, okay, this isn't just polite tea time. Yes, I loved it. It made me happy. I was like, people are going to enjoy these videos. So Danny and Stephanie, thank you so much for your time today, for investing in marriages literally all over the world, and for sharing some of the parts of your story that were probably not the highlight reel at all of your marriage, but they're the real life reel. And they have helped you get to where you are so that you can say, it is worth it to invest in my partner. It is worth it to invest in this marriage. And at the end of the day, I want to still be able to say, you're my teammate. I like you and I love you. So thanks for being here.
Yes.
And thank you for being our very first guest host and killing it like I knew you would. Appreciate you,
thanks.
Amy.
I love
And
talking about
again,
things.
Amy, thank you. Thank you for giving a space for missionaries to open up their heart, to be vulnerable and real, to get conversations like this that are so important started. So thank you as well.
And I'll just say too, if you want to hear, read about some of those or learn about some of the things that we talked about in the survey at the beginning, what Global Trellis put together. Amy, tell them how they can find the survey.
It is at Global Trellis. Look under the resources and you'll find it.
There we go. What a fun time. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, guys.